We're going to hear about the Food Recovery Act of 2017, the group that worked with Professor Palmer.
Good morning. So, this morning, just as I was about to pour myself a bowl of cereal, I noticed my milk had expired 2 days ago. It didn't smell spoiled, but the expiration date made me pause. Should I be a sensible adult and forego the risk of foodborne illness and just dump it down the drain? Or should I just have myself a bowl of cereal? I'm a poor graduate student anyway. So this situation perhaps has happened in many of your kitchens. Today, I'm here to talk about why that choice matters. If I were to dump that gallon of milk down the drain, I would also be dumping the 2,000 gallons of water it took to produce that gallon of milk. I would be dumping the amount of energy it took to care for the cows that produced that gallon of milk. All the greenhouse gas emissions and runoff associated with dairy farm production would also be swirling down the drain. The problems of food waste are not just about the waste of food itself. My name is Aurora Barone, and I'm going to talk to you about how the Food Recovery Act of 2017 plans to address the issue of food waste. We'll look at some of the proposed solutions that this act suggests, the controversial issues surrounding those solutions, and how we can measure their success. When food is wasted, we're not just wasting food. We're wasting water. We're wasting energy. We're generating solid waste that's going to end up in a landfill where it will decompose and emit methane into the atmosphere. Think about that. Our rotting food is becoming a greenhouse gas. Energy is needed to transport our food from the other side of the country or the other side of the globe to have it delivered to our local grocery store. These transportation methods have their own associated carbon emissions that contribute to climate change. These wastes and environmental problems contribute to the challenge of maintaining our food supply in the future, one that will have to sustain a growing population. By addressing this singular issue of food waste, we can mitigate the other types of waste that are associated with it, which is what the Food Recovery Act intends to do. One solution that this act suggests is to provide loans and grants for farmers to adapt waste disposal facilities on site that incorporate anaerobic digestion. Anaerobic digestion occurs when organic matter, such as food waste, decomposes in the absence of oxygen. It breaks into a mixture of gases, primarily carbon dioxide and methane. An anaerobic digester, such as the one pictured here, is able to capture these biofuels or biogases, which can later be used as an energy source for transportation, electricity, and heat. When these gases are separated from the solid and liquid material known as digestate, this digestate alternatively can also be used as a nutrient-rich fertilizer for the farmers to apply to their fields. The Act also proposes to increase the use of refrigerated transportation vehicles, which would help reduce food spoilage. Certain kinds of microbial spoilage can cause a harm risk or can pose a health risk. Food that is exposed to temperatures above 40 degrees Fahrenheit are twice as likely to cause harmful bacteria to grow, such as listeria. Loss of quality, on the other hand, mainly concerns itself with processes that cause our food to brown or to stale, such as the bread pictured here. It has less to do with food safety and more to do with food quality. This brings me to another solution which I will be covering today, which has to do with food date labeling. So, thanks to some intrepid photographers in our workshop group, we can see from these pictures taken at Westside Market that no two food labels are alike. We have use by, sell by, best by, but what do these indicate? Quality? Safety? In the US, we have laws that vary by state and by product that standardize the benchmarks and the language that are used when indicating food quality and food safety. This language, though, can be confusing to consumers who are trying to discern what the difference is between each of these labels. Think back to my conundrum from this morning over whether or not I should dispose of my expired milk. Confusing labels are part of the reason why 90% of us throw away our food too soon. So to reduce this confusion, the Act tries to differentiate between a safety date and a quality date. So to do this, they're going to use two uniform phrases, use by and best if used by. Use by will be required on all products, and it will indicate safety. Manufacturers, though, will still have the option of including a quality date, but they will be restricted to using the uniform phrase of best if used by. However, some believe that the inclusion of an optional quality date may still cause food waste and will not reduce it in the way that it should. Consumers might still confuse the quality date with the safety date, resulting in continued waste of perfectly safe food. So long as we educate the public about the difference between a safety date and a quality date, the confusion that might result from this difference might be mitigated or prevented. Another solution that the Act proposes is to provide financial support for municipal and county composting. Food makes up 14.6% of municipal solid waste as of 2013, and it contributes to 23% of all methane emissions in the US. By composting, we can reduce the amount of methane that's being emitted by organic waste in landfills, we can eliminate the need for chemical fertilizers using compost as a substitute, we can improve water retention in soils, and we can divert the amount of municipal solid waste that is going to landfills. So although composting provides these benefits, upscaling this process presents some hurdles. It can be difficult to regulate what people are actually disposing of in their composting bins. Composting facilities may also produce nitrogen or phosphorus runoff that might pollute nearby waterways. The required transportation services needed in order to deliver the compost might also indirectly lead to the increase of greenhouse gas emissions. So given these reservations, it will be important to measure the success of each solution to ensure that food waste is in fact being reduced. To measure the success of anaerobic digesters, we can compare the amount of food wasted before and after the implementation of these digesters. Currently, about 7% of food that is produced on farms is left in the field to rot. There is no consensus on the best approach for measuring this type of waste. But by extrapolating the amount of unused produce from a sample crop in a field, we might be able to estimate food waste across the entire system. One way in which we can attempt to measure this is by having farmers self-report on how much food they're leaving behind in the fields. Most retailers will rarely report how much food they're rejecting or discarding for fear of losing a competitive advantage or discouraging or upsetting consumers. In fact, in 2017, only one retailer actually reported the total volume of food waste. If retailers prove unreliable with recording or reporting this kind of data, we can look to farmers or distributors to see how much food is actually being turned away. This will give us an accurate number of how much food is being turned away, but it will also indicate where this food is actually going, whether it's going to a landfill or just being left in the fields to rot. So similar to how we cannot rely solely on retailers to self-report, we can't rely on consumers to accurately relay how much food they're wasting. Surveys are a common tool in measuring consumer behavior. However, people tend to report inaccurate answers, consciously or unconsciously, when asked questions about a behavior that they perceive to be negative. Instead, consumers should be asked the more meaningful question of whether or not they understand what the difference is between a quality date and a safety date. The Food Recovery Act is expansive in its approach to addressing food waste across all stages of the production and consumption in the food system. By harnessing anaerobic digestion, utilizing municipal composting, and standardizing food date label language, food waste can be effectively reduced, thereby reducing the waste of other foods or other resources, such as water and energy, as well as reducing the amount of solid waste that ends up in these landfills. When it comes to food waste, even the seemingly small decisions, such as the one I faced this morning over a bowl of cereal, have an impact that far extend the extent of my kitchen sink, far beyond my kitchen sink. Thank you. Any questions? Lee?
First off, great job. Awesome
Thank you.
presentation. If the food labeling standards are passed, would those apply to any food products that are imported into the United States?
So it would be any food product that is sold in a U.S. retail store, yes.
Thank you.
Great job. It's nice to see both the presentation of a technique, but also the drawbacks of it. And so you talked about food digestion, labeling, and food waste. And I wondered whether you came across any mention of increasing irradiation of food as one of the measures that would decrease food spoilage. Whether that's within it, it might be beyond the scope of your project, but I was just curious whether you came across it in the bill.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point, and it's not something we've come across, but it's something definitely we should probably check out for the fall. That would be interesting and following up on.
Oh, go for it. So did you look at all at differences in the amount of food spoilage, for example, between commodities? You have a picture of a watermelon there. I don't know how often watermelon spoils, but there are certain commodities that spoil a lot more. Are there movements to change how those are produced or things like that?
What do you mean by in terms of produce?
Well, as an example, like onions, 70% of onions spoil before people eat them.
I see.
But are there things that we could do to address specific commodities and make them, like you used milk as an example?
No, I understand
People
what you're saying.
Spoil all the time, so.
Yeah, so I'm not quite sure if we were able to actually find any in-depth research that looked at specific, how we can improve the longevity of specific products. But for example, refrigerated transportation vehicle use is usually meant to help produce and create more longevity with like produce and dairy products. But that's not something that we were able to do more in-depth research about for this project.
Thank our